I didn't wait for children to say, oh, let's study cockroaches. You know, I put thought into this pet. I wanted it to be something unusual, and you know, it could be, it doesn't have to be a pet, but just something that children can make observations about. I know other colleagues have, you know, watched children be really interested in how the leaves changed color, and so like they just start looking at leaves and you know, thinking about ideas. But often, and I think it's also really important for children to draw. Like we're finding around spatial reasoning and engineering, like it's very important in spatial reasoning to draw. And so to really have kids doing that with something that is there in front of them that they can hold and that makes them wonder. So it could even be, you know, dilemma lessons. We recently had the opportunity to go up north, and we were learning about wild rice harvest and, you know, the complicated task of harvesting wild rice. And then somebody just casually said, oh, and there was no wild rice in Rainy Lake this year. And so like that's an inquiry question, that's a dilemma question. And so that too could be a way to begin. So I think it just finding something that either you yourself is interested in as a new teacher, something that relates to the science curriculum, or maybe something about environmental sustainability, and just like putting it out to the kids, like they're going to be part of this research community, and really thinking of it that way, and thinking of ways of drawing in resources, but just, you know, giving some time for children to be able to ponder this dilemma. And so that's a way to begin. And I think it's also really important to learn about structures so that it isn't, because people sometimes have the false impression that a knowledge building classroom or an inquiry classroom is with the teachers sitting way back and the kids really doing everything. And it's teaching in this way, teaching in a knowledge building way is an art. It is really, you know, thinking of participant structures that bring children in and that have children see themselves as contributors. That increases student participation, increases their engagement, but they feel empowered, that they're actually contributing to this, you know, this overall understanding of this science concept or this science topic. And so, and looking at participant structures, really understanding the science behind what the kids are doing. We always talk about inquiry being about making children's thinking visible. And children are always making their thinking visible, and we as teachers have to have some of that science knowledge to know. Like, so those kids that were questioning how did the roaches survive the Ice Age, you know, that is about evolution. And, you know, how did these roaches adapt to their environment to become large, and that, you know, they're not flying. They noticed that other roaches had wings and these ones don't. And so these are big questions about evolution and adaptation and survival. And so that, you know, we as teachers have to learn a little bit about that as well to move the thinking forward. So participant structures, you know, allowing for playfulness, really trusting that the kids will come up with questions and that their questions are valid. And even the simplest questions can lead into something quite complex. So I think just leap in and not think that you have to do this for every single science unit that you're doing in the year. You know, I would just say, just try one area a year and just build it up, see what happens, see what the challenges are, and don't be afraid to ask for help. There are many of us to help. There are many people, and things that sort of seem like failures, just learn from them. I mean, in the beginning when I was teaching science, I really was going with the centers approach. And I was designing all of the experiments. I was designing these amazing vinegar experiments. You put the bone in the vinegar and then later it turns to rubber. And so I had all these stations around my classroom of experiments that I designed and that I was excited about. And I was so disappointed that the kids, you know, I had made charts for them and clipboards, and I was so disappointed that they didn't have this spark. They went around, they did it. I'm done this one. Do I have to do the next one? You know, and I really had to reflect on what was going on there. Why was I so excited and they weren't? And so then when I started to learn from Marlene Scardomalia and Carl Berreiter, this idea of knowledge building and children being capable of building knowledge, and your classroom being this hub of knowledge creation, that when I switched that around, I started to see something very different. So these student-designed experiments and this motivation and engagement. And so when I said, okay, I think it's time to stop the cockroach unit, they were like, no, we're still learning, Bev.